It's been 16 years, but we finally have a proper sequel to Apex for the Xbox. Except, you don't drive cars any longer and you don't make cars, and in fact, it has nothing to do with that game. This is a new game from Respawn, creators of Titanfall, and this is their take on the Battle Royale genre. It's a bit different, and it's kind of a neat little game, and it has some cool changes made to the tech since Titanfall 2. To discuss that, I have brought along a fellow pilot who's been playing some Apex with me. Tom, how's it going today?
Pretty good, and what a surprise to have this game in our hands. It came out of nowhere, seemingly. And it's just kind of cool. We've got another game in the so-called Titanfall universe to play around with, again with Source Engine.
Yeah, this was quite a surprise. Nobody really saw this coming, and strategically, it's an interesting approach to just drop this suddenly the way that they did. But based on what we're seeing out there, people seem to like it, and honestly, that includes myself. I'm not really big into Battle Royale games. I did enjoy Blackout and Call of Duty, but I'm not a fan of Fortnite. I'm not hugely into PUBG, but there's something about this one that really clicked with me, and yeah, it's a cool little game.
Yeah, I'm really getting along with it. It's one of the best Battle Royales I've played already in the couple of days we've had exposed to it. But I suppose people really want to know right off the bat, what we're seeing in comparison terms before we get into the game itself, just get it out there.
Yeah.
And you're the guy to ask.
Yes, that's exactly. So before we touch on the comparison details, let's talk about the base of this game, because I think this is pretty interesting. I mean, games like Fortnite have been using Unreal Engine 4, obviously. That's been very common, and, obviously Call of Duty has its own take as well. But here, Respawn is still using their sort of modified version of the Source Engine. And yeah, they've sort of enhanced it or made some changes in order to support a large map. Not that Titanfall 2 didn't already have some large maps, specifically in the campaign, but this is a huge island with 60 players within a single match, which is very different in terms of demands placed on the engine compared to previous games that they've worked on. Now, obviously, there's some different considerations here. When you're playing proper Titanfall multiplayer, you can have more players concentrated in areas with more Titans on screen and things like that, because there are no Titans in this game and it's more spread out. But still, the fact that it's this large and it loads this quickly is quite impressive. And I actually think visually, at least for myself, I really like the look of the game. It's geometrically dense. It has sort of a obvious Mad Max inspiration to it, which, in turn reminds me of id Software's Rage. But it just has like a cool look to it that really works for me. It's some excellent first-person animation and great draw distance and just a nice high level of detail. And of course, it's targeting 60 FPS across all platforms.
That's it, yeah. I suppose everything, as with Respawn's work in Titanfall 2, is built with that target in mind. I mean, the game, the aesthetic is beautiful in spots. Part of the map are really gorgeous. I love the grassy areas, the water, the mud slick as you slide down. It's some great shader work there. But you can tell this is not, a major, huge sort of visual showcase, but artistically, I love what's going on here. And there's a lot going on to support 60 FPS, which isn't, necessarily a given across every console, as we'll soon see. But before we get to that, shall we go into some visual comparisons here? You've taken on PS4, Xbox One, and their enhanced equivalents. What have you got for us? What's kind of on the menu in terms of what you're getting for the enhanced consoles compared to the base?
Yeah, so, like Titanfall 2, this game does support both the Pro and the Xbox One X, and there's some new features in play here. First of all, ambient occlusion is now present on Xbox One X and on the PS4 Pro, which is new. That was not in Titanfall 2 on the consoles. It was available in the PC with HBAO+. But this time, though, while it is on those machines, you don't get it on the base consoles. And it is kind of noticeable in a few scenes, but not a huge deal necessarily. Secondly, shadows are drawn at a higher quality and further out into the distance on PS4 Pro and Xbox One. You sort of see shadow maps drawing in right around your character on the base consoles. Again, it's mildly distracting, and it's exactly the kind of cut you would expect to make in order to reach your 60 FPS target. But Also, I suppose the level of detail changes are pushed out further. On Xbox One X, it actually seems to have the highest quality LODs at a distance. So the pop-in is not evident there, and this is how it was with Titanfall 2. The Pro comes in right behind that. They're very similar, but Xbox One X has the advantage. And then, of course, there's the base consoles, which fall behind that. So all in all, it's a very similar looking game across all the machines, but you do get some extra fancy details, I guess you could say, that make the game appear more refined on the mid-generation consoles.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I mean, if we look at a game like Blackout, by design, you covered this in your a kind of deep dive analysis on that game. They kept all the assets and the grass distance in place, and they seem to have done the same here to make the gameplay side viable and fair for every console, despite playing against each other.
Yeah.
So, chopping and changing the ambient occlusion doesn't really make much of a difference to the gameplay. It seems like an aesthetic change they can make, and they can remove on base to favor performance if they can. So it is a wise choice, and I have to say I played the base consoles against you. I drew the short straw there, but it was fun to see just how the base Xbox One kind of adapts. And really, it was mainly to my eyes, it was like object LODs. You could see the sort of switch over very obviously. Texture filtering, definitely not a high setting there.
Oh yeah.
And the shadows, as you say, definitely take a cut.
Exactly. Also, one interesting thing is if you start the game up before it's completely finished downloading, you actually get an error message. Well, not an error message, but a warning.
Oh,
that the high quality textures haven't been installed. Are you sure you want to still play? And I've been, so to me that suggests that you've got these HD textures or whatever you want to call them on the consoles as well here. And I've been comparing the base versus the higher end consoles together, and there is a difference in clarity that's very subtle and probably impossible to see on YouTube, but it's hard to say sometimes if it's down to the resolution or if there really is a difference. But there is a sense that textures are slightly clearer on the Xbox One X and Pro. But I guess, other than that, it's about the same. And the only other thing to discuss then is resolution,
right? Which
is a little bit tricky. So I'll start with the Pro and the X, and then I'll let you touch on the base resolutions.
Sure thing.
So basically, the setup here is nearly identical to Titanfall 2, I think we found, where it's an extremely adaptive resolution with the TSSAA, I guess they call it. So you've got pretty nice anti-aliasing in effect here, but the resolution changes a lot. So on the PS4 Pro then, and Titanfall 2, it seems to vary primarily between 1080p and 1440p, and it seems similar here as well, but I noticed that it seemed to hang towards 1080p more often, and in rare instances it could actually drop below that. We found at least a couple instances that were more in the 900p range, so it does seem like the resolution can go below that level. I guess the goal here is just to hit and maintain a high level of performance at all costs, and in general, on the Pro at least, it's pretty good in that regard, which we'll touch on shortly. Then there's the Xbox One X, which is similar, but the resolution seems like it can go above 1440p. I haven't seen any native 4K, which was possible in Titanfall 2, and theoretically, I guess it could be possible here as well in very light circumstances. But the Xbox One X, on average, we seem to count pixels in the 1260 to 1292p range rather often, I'd say. So, it could go higher, but you're kind of still in that slightly fuzzy territory. It's sharper than Pro, but only by a bit. So it's a similar setup to Titanfall 2, but just shifted down a little bit is sort of my impression.
Yeah,
here.
It's one of those games where you could probably catch the max bounds on both those machines if you look to the sky and catch a wood board running at a slight slant. But practically speaking, which is what we're doing here, yeah, these are the sort of ranges we're looking at for regular gameplay. So to look at the base consoles, we have the PS4 first here, and yeah, there's definitely a kind of an extensive range. We know it hits 1080p as the upper bounds. As you'd expect, it's kind of the max output, and you can probably look to the skies and get that. But we pinpointed a moment in the game together where one of us threw a smoke grenade and it filled the room. And at that point, we had one of our lower frame rate dips, which makes it a perfect candidate for picking out the lower bounds, which was 720p, 1280 by 720. It's not a regular number, but it's certainly possible it can go down to about that level when pushed. And, but generally it's closer to 1080p. But when we look to a console like Xbox One, it feels like inevitable that we'd see similar numbers to Titanfall 2, and that equates to 648p to 720p. Potentially it could go lower, but generally we're kind of in that range. So it's kind of it tapers off relative to the power spec of each console quite clearly.
Yeah, so, this is a really difficult one to pixel count due to that, but I think that the average resolution, or just like the general feeling, is most important here since it's changing all the time. So, yeah, that's a pretty good summary of that. But obviously, the reason it's so dynamic has a lot to do with performance, and since this game targets 60 FPS, we should probably talk about this. So for this session then, we did what we've been doing lately is one of us plays on the Pro / Xbox One X and the other plays on the base consoles, and then we're able to sort of line up our frame rate analysis. So we're starting here with the PlayStation consoles. And right off the bat, one of the most interesting things that we noticed is the initial drop sequence onto the ground. On the Pro, it is unlocked, or mostly 60 FPS with some dips, whereas on PS4, they instead cap it at 30, right up until you hit the ground, and then, bam, the frame rate unlocks, and both are at 60.
That's right. It was something that really struck us as odd at first, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. These base consoles have a lot to draw in. There's maybe not a lot of need to really have that fast 60 FPS response right off the bat as you're flying down.
Right, but so, obviously then, once we're on the ground, that's where things are most important, and honestly, the general feeling here is that the game does stick pretty closely to its 60 FPS target most of the time. When things are quiet, it's pretty solid. It's very solid on the Pro, actually, often holding to it. But on the base PS4, looking at the graphs that I've got from you here, there definitely seems to be some little hitches and skips along the way that are less common on the Pro. Not to say that you don't get that on the Pro at all. But I guess what we really noticed is while exploration is generally okay, once you start to get into a more heavily populated area, even if it's just one other team, you immediately start to notice some drips. Like in this spot here, I'm sliding down the hill and Tom is right behind me, and that's one of the most enjoyable maneuvers actually in the game.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
Yeah, the base system just kind of, it's above 50, but it's just kind of hanging a little bit below the target, so it's not quite as smooth as what we saw there on the Pro. And then once we get down to the bottom of the hill, we engage in some combat within that building there, and again, this actually gives both consoles some trouble. The smoke affects the alpha particles, which you'd expect, but naturally the base PS4 struggles a little bit more there. But still, again, this is such a variable game, right? Like, what you're doing can change at any point. There's so many places to be. What's happening on screen changes all the time. You really can't say that it's dropping constantly. It's mostly 60 FPS with dips, which means it's similar to some of the other competitive battle royale games, I suppose. Like, I think it's a little bit more stable overall than maybe Blackout.
It potentially, certainly it feels like they have, it feels like it's cornering 60 FPS most of the way, and we tend to pluck out the most interesting moments of gameplay anyway, because it makes for a more interesting video, and so inevitably you get more sort of drops where there's exciting things going on. But what, it happens in Battle Royale games is there's a lot of running about, lots of looking at the floor, picking up weapons and doing that sort of thing, and it's just clean 60 all the way through that. So the proportion of 60 FPS gameplay is clearly, in the right place.
Yeah, you need that precision for picking up items on the floor. I mean, if you can't pick up that helmet easily, then what are you even playing for?
Tapping that square button. Yeah. Overall, I was really impressed by the performance as a game that's come out, kind of out of the blue, and there's, potentially more optimization work to come. This is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'd expect from Respawn. It's just cool that they were able to pull it off on a larger scale like this. So, but I guess we should talk about Xbox then, because this is where the differential becomes significantly larger. So like I said, Xbox One X is generally operating with a slightly higher resolution, and maybe that's why during the drop-in sequence, the frame rate is lower. Every time I've dropped, there is more slowdown on the X versus the Pro. And it's specifically during these drop-in sequences, and it may have to do with a slightly higher res, or I'm not sure what's going on there. It's a little bit strange, but obviously Xbox One S, which is what we're using here, just is capped at 30 FPS just like the PS4. But again, really, the drop-in sequence it's kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's a cool-looking thing, and everybody loves being the jump master, but it's not that important. Once you're on the ground, that's where things really start to, you start to see the thing in action. And I found that Xbox One X turns in good performance overall. In fact, I'd say both the Pro and X, you could kind of exchange the two in terms of average levels of performance. They both hit 60 and maintain it most of the time. And in fact, during gameplay, the X might be slightly smoother on average as well. It's a very stable level of performance for the most part. You can definitely get some dips here and there in some of the combat sequences. There's no doubt about that. And this really, most of the slowdown seems to stem when you reach a high point in the map. Like if you use one of those balloons, for instance, and you sort of launch yourself up in the air, you'll notice some dips there as well.
That does make sense.
X is not the issue. The real issue here is Xbox One S, or the base consoles, if you will. And man, this for a series that kind of started out, so to speak, on this system, I guess the performance is technically better than Titanfall 1, but it's still it's kind of subpar.
Yeah, I took point on this one, and I noticed it right away. It's one thing to show it on the graph, it's another to feel it with no indicator like that on your screen. And I was playing along with you, kind of following your trail, and every turn I thought, gosh, that was a steep cliff that this frame rate just jumped off. It felt like it was stuttering a little bit, and it was just kind of definitely off point when it comes to 60 FPS.
Yeah, that's kind of there's two things happening here. One, when just wandering around certain areas of the map, the Xbox just sort of hangs in the mid 50s, so it feels slightly less fluid than it does on Xbox One X or the other consoles. But then there's also these massive frame time spikes, and I've looked at them. I didn't want to adjust the frame time graph just for this, because it doesn't happen that often, but when moving between certain areas, you'll get these like 180 millisecond spikes where like the whole game sort of pauses for a second, and it feels like a nasty stutter. And that is something that doesn't seem to happen on any other version, so it's a little bit weird and it's a little jarring. So I feel like, you're just going to be less competitive overall if you're playing on Xbox One S or base.
Yeah, this is it. I thought, what could it be? I mean, I've got, as an insight, I had the game installed on the internal HDD on the Xbox One S. I was connected by Ethernet direct connection on a very fast office network, just the same as our base PS4 tests. So it felt really like it was a fair setup. And it happened in, I suppose, the 3 games we had, and one was a very extended, long one where we got to like the second to last squad. But yeah, definitely there was a lot of points where I was turning quite rapidly, and then the whole screen would hang like a good half second behind where I wanted to be. Very, very distracting, and I did feel perhaps that more than the 50 FPS sort of performance. That was really the thing that kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think that's a pretty good summary then overall. You've got mostly hitting 60 FPS on the upper end consoles. The PS4 does pretty well for itself, and the S or base Xbox kind of struggles a bit and maybe isn't the best way to be playing this game. Though again, it's still pretty playable overall, and it's certainly like light years beyond something like PUBG.
Yes,
so
yeah.
There is that. Yeah, let's keep that in perspective here. And yeah, overall, it's a great looking game with a cool aesthetic. I would not normally, if you say, "Oh, John, here's a multiplayer free to play game," that's like kryptonite for me. I'm not into that at all usually, but I really like I really like playing this one. It's a lot of fun, and it just comes down to Respawn's excellent like core mechanics. And something I notice is like you can take a little bit more damage, I think, in this game than other battle royales. So almost in a Halo-like way, if you get pinged by an enemy, you kind of have a chance to react and respond and try to counterattack, and then it becomes sort of a strategic ballet of death as you're sort of figuring out how you're going to take out the other guy. Whereas, in something like Call of Duty and even Fortnite and stuff, it just feels like you can often go down too quickly. And if you're not, I suppose it's great for those that are playing those games all the time, but I feel like it takes a little bit of the fun away. Like, I really like this sort of these engagements that you get into with people in Apex. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's a definite finality to the deaths in those other games where there's a bit more lenience in this one, especially given it's squad-based, which gives you the leeway to revive people or even take them to a respawn point, which kind of vindicates the choice of name for the developer with this one, because usually battle royales are less forgiving. They have a really good system. Sure, people are a bit more of a bullet sponge to take down. You've got your health meter, armor, and the sort of shield as well for some characters, and then you get to revive yourself as well. But
yeah, again, it's more close to Halo in that sense,
Yeah.
with the shield and health system.
Yeah, but it becomes more of a battle of attrition, and you've got to really strategize and work out where your enemy is in terms of, are they ready to pop, are they kind of going to go down, and who's nearby to revive them. So
Yeah, another thing that I really wanted to point out was the pinging system, where you can use the R1 button to essentially highlight things in the world. You can let your squad mates know, okay, let's go over here, or here's a piece of armor, here's a weapon, oh, I saw an enemy over there. You don't need voice chat to do it. You just ping it by pressing the button. It shows up on everybody else's screen on your squad, and it's amazing. You can really play this game effectively without voice chat.
which is crucial. It's
yeah,
absolutely
it's
crucial,
amazing.
because they needed to lower the barrier of entry for people who don't have headsets to make the squad play possible in the first place. Otherwise, you can't go lone wolf in this game, as is the temptation to do. You just sort of have to collaborate. And so the Respawn have given everyone all the tools they need to make that work. Whether you use them or not is up to you.
Exactly. But I think that's enough Apex chat from now. It's a great looking game. It's running their enhanced version of Source. It's probably one of the last games we'll see running this engine, since Respawn itself admitted that, yeah, maybe it's starting to look a little dated, but it also kind of shows that if you handle the art side properly and you really put a nice vision into it, despite the brown color scheme that people like to complain about, I think it's a great looking game. And in fact, it might be the best looking Battle Royale game, even if not technically, which I suppose would still go to Blackout. But anyway, thanks for joining me for this one, Tom.
Absolutely no problem.
And if you did enjoy this random chat about Apex, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, follow us over on Twitter, and of course ring that notification bell up there to hear more about each video as it is posted. And of course, until next time, this is Tom and John signing off.